which often surprises people. Funnel web spiders are not very well named. Funneled connotes a narrowing opening. Sometimes you see funnel web spiders that have these sorts of entrances, but more often it's a slit with a narrow opening, and the funnel web in fact pushes that open with its body when it's hunting at the entrance of the burrow. The silk at the entrance is extended out as trip lines over the ground, and these act as warning lines for approaching insects, beetles, whatever, small frogs, and the spider will run out to the end of those trip lines and grab the prey.
It doesn't hunt large prey because it instinctively knows that it can't eat this. It certainly demolishes crickets. The venom is injected into the food, which breaks down all the tissues and organs into a liquid, and it's taken up by the mouth parts. That is how spiders actually eat their food.
We get a lot of spiders brought into the museum. Hundreds of them are funnel web spiders, but certainly many hundreds of them are not funnel web spiders. People get confused about identification of the animals, and we have an identification service here, as well as an excellent booklet which we sell in the bookshop. One of the obvious identifying features which people ought to learn to look for on a funnel web spider, male that is the spur about halfway along the second leg. The thing which is most commonly confused for a funnel web spider is the brown trapdoor spider. It has an open burrow, which is a nice little funnel-shaped burrow sloping down into the ground, and people see this and say, I've got funnel webs, hundreds of them, because they do tend to build up into quite large populations. If you've got holes that you suspect are funnel webs out in the middle of the lawn or out in an open area or in the garden or wherever, the likelihood is that they're not, because it just gets too dry for them out there. Funnel webs tend to like to get into sheltered situations. Particularly they like to get under things, under the base of tree roots, rocks in a rockery, under junk that's been left on the ground for years, places like that. So funnel webs tend to be hidden to some extent. The other sorts of spiders you're likely to encounter tend to be more out in the open.
Don't like any spiders at all.
I don't like them and I'd keep away from them.
They're part of our heritage. Have a look.
People are always finding funnel webs in pools and getting worried about it. What happens maybe with a swimming pool is that there is a humidity gradient around it, but equally and probably more likely is that the swimming pool is just a great big hole in the ground and males simply fall in. They don't drown immediately. The question is, can funnel webs swim? They can't. But they can float very effectively because they get an air bubble around the body, and they can float on top for probably 2 days, sometimes upside down with their air-breathing organs, the lung books, exposed to air, so they're fine. When they eventually get waterlogged and sink, they still take a little patch of air around the book lungs down with them, and they can live fully immersed in water for perhaps 24 hours. So by no means think that because a funnel web is on the bottom of your pool, it's dead. It may be torpid, that is, it won't move when you pull it out, but half an hour later it may recover. So some caution there is a good idea. It is the summer that funnel webs are most active. That, of course, is the holiday season. People are going out in their gardens, they're going camping, and it's useful to remember that you may encounter a funnel web, so it's good to keep these things in mind.
Here we have the skin of a female funnel web spider. They're a bit like crabs and snakes. As they grow, they eat more, they grow, and they grow bigger than their skin. They haven't got a skeleton. What holds them together is the skin. But they get too big for their skin, so they must jump out of their skin. And that's what they do, they shed it. They virtually climb out of it. Funny thing, legs and all. Now there are these two large fangs. The ordinary spiders around the house that live in webs and on fences and that sort of thing, their fangs tend to go across ways. They go that way. Whereas these ones, funnel webs, go backwards. That allows them to reach up and pounce onto their prey and virtually spear them.
The other thing about funnel web caution, if you like, is simply to observe sensible behaviour if you're in, as I say, a funnel web area. You don't go outside barefoot at night. You don't leave clothing on an outside laundry floor or shoes in a garage where a funnel web can crawl in. And if you do, you shake them out thoroughly before you put them on.
Well, this is where I live, Scotland Island, on Sydney's Pittwater. It's the Club Med for funnel webs. The place is absolutely infested. You go over there with a shovel, stick it in, you'll easily find 50 funnel webs, no worries. There's a little essential tool you need over there, and that's the Gumby. You can't walk anywhere without them. And there's a little trick you've got to do with them. Just make sure none of the little buggers are down inside. Don't put your hand in, because they'll bite you. Just give it a nice little gentle tap. If you bash it too hard, you'll give them a headache, make them aggressive, and they're likely to bite you.
That's the one. There you go.
Spraying is one of the worst things that you can do to try and get rid of funnel webs in your garden. You're going to kill all the other useful invertebrates, insects, whatever, in your garden if you do a blanket spray.
Good job.
And funnel webs are rather well protected under rocks, holes in rockeries, etc. They're hard to get at. Now, these pesticides that are used are nerve poisons. And with a sublethal dose, what you get is not a full poisoning effect, you get a stimulatory effect of the nervous system, and so the funnel webs become more active than they were before. So after spraying, if you insist on doing this, expect to see more funnel web activity than you had before spraying. So put a draft strip in, and that should block the funnel webs coming into the house.
The funnel web has few actual natural predators. The bandicoot would most certainly be a natural predator. They actually dig out and search for these things under the ground.
And sometimes some birds, which pick them out of the burrow.
The idea has been brought forward that if you surround yourself by ducks or chooks or something of this nature, that will eradicate funnel webs. But none of these things actually hunt for spiders as part of their food source. The funnel web is nocturnal, and ducks and chooks are diurnal. They move around during the day, and they don't have the expertise in finding all these little things under the ground that a bandicoot does.
There are more interesting predators, and one of those is a thing called a mammathid worm, which the animal may pick up in its food. And these things, once they get inside the animal, grow by feeding on the spider's body tissues. But they do a very clever thing. They don't feed on any of the vital tissues of the spider. They feed on its digestive gland, primarily, musculature, stuff like that. Nervous system, gut is all left intact. And so the animal becomes progressively weaker while supporting its parasite inside it. Now, eventually, the parasite gets large, so large, that it simply bursts out of the body of the spider, and the spider just collapses.
When we look at the sort of settlement of Australia right from the first fleet onwards, people's perception of this country was as being hostile. They didn't see it as a friendly nation or, friendly place to settle down. It wasn't people's idea of paradise. We've got extremes in climate, we've got extremes in wildlife, from cuddly little koalas to the most deadly spiders and snakes in the world.
We also have tree funnel webs as well as ground funnel webs. The females build their burrows in trees, rough bark trees like paper barks, turpentines, banksias, and in coastal areas you can see quite large accumulations of these things. I was in an interesting area recently which is absolutely infested with these things. Every tree had 1, 2, or maybe 3 funnel webs in the bark or rot holes in the tree itself. And I wandered about having a look. And in the centre of it I found an old iron bed decaying away there. I realised there was some uprights which were the remains of an old hut someone had been living in apparently. There were old cans lying on the ground. And apparently this character had been living out there amongst Lord knows how many thousands of funnel web spiders. For how long I don't know. But clearly he had no idea about funnel webs, their toxicity or anything like that. It's a case where ignorance was totally bliss, I think. And I cannot imagine being out in that forest at night during the funnel web season with probably many hundred male funnel web spiders wandering about that forest. Not a good place to be.
One of the things that's happened is we've adapted to it. Like we shake out our boots when we're out in the bush, we check back doorsteps, we check the mailbox first before we stick our hand in it. So you get things like the digger syndrome, where people sort of develop this rugged individuality, laugh and spit in the face of danger, and move on, get on with life, you know, so what? What's happening?
It's probably early afternoon, crawling under this house and moving rubbish as it crawled through. And the next thing, bang, just like a needle got into you. And he shoved his little fangs in. I just pulled them off and I squashed them between my fingers.
When a funnel web bites, it's usually smaller children who are most at risk. It can be very painful. The laceration can be multiple because the spider can bite several times, and it can inject quite a good swag of venom.
The lady came down with a baby in her arm, calling out to me, "Spider, spider."
On the 23rd of February 1990, Julia was bitten by a Sydney funnel web. She was sitting on the kitchen floor and a spider was walking across in front of her and she reached over and we presume she picked it up. I couldn't believe how fast the reaction from the bite to the time of onset of symptoms.
The smaller the body size, the more quickly the venom can have its effect.
And she was just terrified. She had a bright red face and this ring of white around her mouth and very blue lips. Within 10 minutes, she was having trouble breathing and she'd gone this bright red colour. So I just think it's unbelievable the amount of time that you've got. You've got nothing, really, to get somebody to the hospital if they've been badly bitten.
And within seconds she came down again, jumped in the car, drove as fast as they could down to Mona Vale Hospital.
And of course I was hysterical. They had to contend with not only this poor sick child but an hysterical mother at the same time. And I had 2 little kids, 2 children that were older than Julia who were also very upset. So somebody came and whisked them away. I have no idea where they went, but they were taken away and they started to work on Julia.
The dosage of antivenom is based on the amount you will need to neutralise the venom from one bite. And the venomous animals have shown no tendency to reduce the dose they give to small children.
The recovery was spectacular. I think that's the only way you can describe it.
But in general, it's practice to give a bit more in a smaller child rather than less, because the effects are so much stronger.
She ate lunch on Sunday, and by Sunday afternoon we brought her home. She was discharged straight from intensive care, which is pretty unusual, but that's how quick the recovery was.
It made headlines all over the world at the time because it was just one of those dreadful things that happened in Sydney.
We think what precipitated the spider walking into the house was the fact that our neighbours had had their yards sprayed and they move around. It makes their environment unfriendly, so they pack up and move around, and of course the first place they go looking is inside a house which is nice and clean and doesn't have any sprays. She had about half a dozen puncture wounds on the palm of her hand, so he thinks that it probably tried to bite its way out of her hand. You can't really blame it, can you?
There's no doubt her mother
saved her life by putting the first aid on promptly. We know 2 children have died in less than 2 hours after funnel web spider bites before antivenom was available, and this action, I'm sure, was life-saving.
Dr. Sutherland and I have had quite a bit of contact over the years. I think he's wonderful. Without the antivenin, she would never have survived. She would have died.
The spider is a unique spider. There's no venom like it in the world, and so it was really new territory preparing an antivenom. The antivenom took about 19 years to develop. There were a lot of early problems that were technical. Everything that we did that we felt should have worked didn't work.
They discovered that the main toxin, which is the atraxotoxin, was actually adhering to the glass of all the laboratory equipment. So therefore, the vials and the pipettes that we use before we actually receive them from the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories are actually siliconized so that the toxin does not stick to the glass.
Once this problem was discovered and solved, then the actual actions of the venom could be worked out and its properties determined. It was in June 1980 that the first hint of an antivenom occurred. It was noticed that newborn mice who had received a certain rabbit sera and venom lived a little bit longer than they should have. And we showed that purified sera, processed a bit further, prevented funnel web venom from killing monkeys. When we'd shown that, since we'd had a little boy die in Sydney in January of that year,